You want to pay attention to where your feet are and what their rolls are, because of course you've got the brake on the right and the clutch on the left. And so in an emergency situation, you have to be able to immediately remember where you are. High quality luxury motoring has changed a great deal in the almost 100 years since this Minerva was built in 1927. Minerva was one of two great Belgian firms, the other being Imperia, and Minerva was founded to build cars from its foundations as a bicycle company in 1903. And not long thereafter, Sylvain de Jong, who founded Minerva, got the worldwide license to use Charles Knight's patented sleeve valve engine, which promised smoothness and power in a way that many other large conventional valve engines could not. And I know that my friend Jay Leno is a great fan of the sleeve valve engine, and in some ways not a fan of it. He loves the elegance of the engineering of it, the simplicity of it, the smoothness of it, but it has the unfortunate side effect of being rather smoky in operation, which wasn't a big deal back when it was developed, but obviously became a bigger deal as time has gone on. And this Minerva, a 1927 AF 32 CV, and the 32 CV refers to its taxable horsepower, because it's actually a 6-liter car with considerable torque and extremely heavy controls. Driving it here on these rather small, heavily crowned roads is a bit of a challenge, but you can also tell why this car had its adherents among people who could choose between Rolls-Royce, Hispano-Suiza, Duesenberg, all of the great luxury marks, the big Mercedes, because certainly if I'm being chauffeured in this car, I think it'd be a rather more enjoyable experience than actually driving this car. Nevertheless, this is a car built for a purpose, which is smooth, easy driving, and it delivers on that purpose. It's very funny too. This body, which is a sport sedan body by LeBaron of Detroit, is very nautical in feeling. The pointed windshield looks very much like that of a speedboat, or perhaps a commuter yacht, rather, more appropriately. And it handles a bit like a commuter yacht, because things have to be planned far in advance, and the controls are extremely heavy. I think that no one would ever have to do leg day at the gym again, just operate this clutch for a few hours, and I think that would do it. And of course, it also has the wonderful center throttle, like a Bentley or a veteran Alfa Romeo, which keeps you very attuned to what it is you're doing. You want to pay attention to where your feet are and what their rolls are, because of course you've got the brake on the right and the clutch on the left. And so in an emergency situation, you have to be able to immediately remember where you are. One of the things that's very impressive about this car, again, also, is the build quality. This is a very, very highly finished car when new. This has been superbly restored by our friend Stephen Babinski at Automotive Restorations in Lebanon, New Jersey. And in fact has won a class award twice at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, the second time in our care in the Audrain collections, and that is after a restoration that was more than 10 years old, was simply slightly refreshed. So it says a lot about the quality of the restoration work, but also about the quality of this car in general. This is a car that, it's not surprising that this car has lasted as long as it has, because it was a car clearly built with quality in mind and with long-lasting character. It's also interesting having discussion with some of the video crew earlier about some of the cars in the collection, about what makes them interesting and or pleasurable to drive. And one of the things that's quite interesting about this car is, of course, I said that the controls are rather heavy. The steering wheel is absolutely immense. And that's for a reason, so you can actually control this car. But for someone of my height, I'm 5'8½", I'm actually looking through the steering wheel. The top end of the steering wheel is directly in my line of sight of the road, which is rather disconcerting. Cuts off that wonderful head of Minerva on top of the radiator. But it's very interesting again because cars like this are not terribly difficult to drive beyond the weight of the controls, because of course that wonderful torque, you're not constantly rolling through the gears. You just get it to top as soon as you can, and the car just takes care of itself, which is quite interesting. The chauffeur of this car, though, had to pay attention to what he was doing, because every moment you have to make sure you know where you are. It'll be very interesting to see how this car would behave on a flatter, smoother road than the one I'm on right now. But remembering in 1927, there were a lot of roads like this, and not a lot of very flat, smooth roads. So this is probably more of the experience that the driver had in 1927 than drivers have had since. I also happen to think that LeBaron did a beautiful job with this car, because a formal car is difficult to make very attractive, and this is a very attractive car. I think the lines are very sleek. As I said, I mentioned before, the yacht-like details, and you see that throughout the design. And while it's not probably the most fun car in the world to drive, I'm thinking, comparing this directly to the, later, but the 1932 Marmon 16 is a very, very, very different experience altogether. This has a bit of the flavor of the 20s looking backwards rather than the 20s looking forward. And it's got twice the weight, maybe 3 times or 4 times the weight of a typical veteran luxury car, but it doesn't yet have the suspension sophistication that would come in the 1930s, with better balanced wheels and tires, and especially front suspension geometry. But nonetheless, as an historical object, this is absolutely astonishing. And it's slightly again sad that Minerva lasted after their merger with Imperia in the 1930s up until World War II. After the war, they didn't come back. The factory did manufacture a Land Rover under a license, the Audrain, and then they had a falling out, and that production stopped. And then after that, they attempted to relaunch in car production, but it didn't come to anything, because again, Europe in the late 50s was a very difficult place to think about launching car production with what was going on in many of the major markets there. And Minerva has certainly been largely forgotten in the US, although, much like Isotta Fraschini, one of Minerva's biggest markets was the US, where, not surprisingly, they were favored by film stars and the like, who wanted something that was different and had great presence. And this Minerva certainly is different and has amazing presence. It's one of the great things about the Audrain collections, being able to sample so many different cars, so many different types, and getting an idea of what it's like to experience the visions of creators like Minerva. And I'm very fortunate that I have that opportunity.